Hello, everybody. It is your boy, the god of weebs, also known as the god of anime, back here with an old video for all of you. And today's video is going to be, what if Deku was a bit? And the last time I left off was in the classroom. Aizawa and Deku actually having a fight because they picked the bone. They have bone to pick, and all the kids are amazed. Even Ida, and he would probably report this, but he sees how fluently they're fighting. And this is where Aizawa notices that they're in the middle of the class, and he says, "Izuku, sit down." This is where Izuku's about to punch his face, then catches him, and then he goes to sit down, and then he sits down far away from Bakugo and Izumi, because Izumi are sitting next to each other, and the last seat was far away from them, so that was the only seat open. And this is where Bakugo says, "Wow, that little nerd could keep up with you. I'm surprised, so I can whoop your ass whenever time I want. If that little dickhead can beat you, well, I can whoop your ass," he says. And then Aizawa says, "Go ahead, try." And this is where Bakugo gets up, uses explosions, flies all the way to Aizawa, and this is where he's noticed that he starts to fall. And then he starts to fall. He's like, "What?" And then he falls straight flat on the floor, not even being able to catch himself, because this is the weak, scrawny, all he relies on the quirk, Bakugo, and Bakugo falls straight on the ground. Then he says, "You can't even make it this far? How are you even gonna fight me? How are you gonna be able to fight me?" And he says, "Ugh, my arms, you are gonna die." And this is where he says, "Ah, ah, ah." This is where Azumi uses her fire manipulation, and picks up Bakugo and she puts him down. Where the whole class are like, they're confused at this point. And this is where Aizawa says, "Let's continue with the mission, with the class." And he does everything. Everybody gets everything. But this is where he says, like he was doing, everybody was doing it, introducing themselves, because they don't want, Aizawa didn't want them to do like they don't want them to go to whatever it's called. I done forgot. So he says, "Have you?" And he takes up some gym clothes out of his sleeping bag, and he says, "Put these on. You're gonna have, and meet me downstairs at the a training ground 15." And this is where they said, Uraka says, "What about orientation?" This is where Aizawa says, "We came here to learn how to be heroes, not some stupid orientation. I guess you guys want to stall from being heroes." And this is where Ida gets up. As Ida says, "But that's very unprofessional." This is where Aizawa says, "You want me to expel you, kid?" And this is where Uraka says, "You can't do that." And she says, this is where Deku speaks up. He expelled a whole class before. So I would rather you, like, put on those gym clothes and do as he says. This is where Aizawa says, "Thank you, Deku. Thank you, Midoriya." No, he says, "Probably, child. Now stop talking and put those gym clothes on. Probably go to a locker or something. I don't care what you do." This is where the girls go to the bathroom, but the boys stay in class. This is where Bakugo sees Deku. This is where Bakugo starts after, because he has his shirt off now, and he starts rocket launching himself all the way to the all the way to Deku, and he's like, "Damn nerd!" And this is where he tries to explode. But as soon as his quirk is about to go off, Deku really has his hand and like forces it back behind him and pushes his face in the ground. He says, "You want to pick a bone? I would not want you to die." He says, and this is where Deku or Midoriya releases some bloodlust that only Bakugo can feel. Like he put the bloodlust waves to Bakugo so no one else pees their pants. This is Bakugo's like, he's like, oh my god. And this is where he starts, it's like he wants to pee his pants, but he's not, let's say he doesn't want to. Like he's that scared, but he doesn't want to do it to embarrass himself. So he doesn't. And this is where he gets up. He says, okay, we can sort that out. And this is where all the girls are listening to the boys. Jiro with her quirk, and she's stating everything that the boys say. And she just told them what just happened. Azumi is upset. She's like, that my brother can't do that. And he's like, that's your brother? Yeah, but he's supposed to be adopted. My mom gave him up as soon as she found out he didn't have a quirk. How all of a sudden he has a quirk? She explaining, and Zero is listening but has her headphones in. And then she looks, and then she can hear the boys, especially Kirishima, says, "Wow, dude, you're shredded. I wish I had that big of a big abs, that much abs like you, bro. You're manlier than me, and I'm really manly." This is where Mineta is going to go through a pig hole, and this is where he says Deku appears in front of the pig hole, and then he punches Mineta as slightly as he can and sends Mineta flying. He says, "I don't think that the girls will like you doing that, you perv." It's where he's like, Why would you do that? I was gonna get the good stuff. You monster. You even know what to like to grab big titties, big bazonkas, honkers." And he starts to bust a nut. And this is where Izuku just puts on the gym clothes and says, and this is where Jiro tells him, Jiro tells everybody how Midoriya just saved them their pride. And then this is where all the girls, except for Inazumi, asks how all at the same time. And Mina says, "Well, tell us." And this is where Jiro says, "Mineta, you know that grape boy, the grape crate, whatever his quirk is, with the the purple bars on his head. He's a pervert, and he was trying to peek on us." This is where, I don't know, but it sounded like a bunch of wind popped up, and I think it was in front of him, and he says, "I don't think the girls would like that." And this is where she said, this is what she heard. And this is where it says, and she says, and then he punched him in his face, and by the sounds of it, he went flying, and he started babbling off about titties, bazonkers, bongers, and all that. And then they're like, and Zumi's like, "What? I'm confused. He's quirkless." And all the girls are like, "What? He's quirkless?" And they're like, "We'll talk to Aizawa Sensei about it, because he's good." And this is where Ida walks up to Deku and he says, I know this is not his mentality, but he really didn't like Mineta, so he says, "Good job, young fellow student." And he says, "Well, thank you. Ever need Perva to get done with?" Call me. This is where they go outside. Bakugo is still traumatized. This is where, this is where, this is where Aizawa said. This is where the girls walk up to Aizawa. Now Aizawa says, "Can I help you?" And this is where Azum, and this is where Mina asks, how is Deku that strong if he has no quirk? And this is where he says, "Oh, let me tell you something." And he gives a speech about how people are fortunate and not fortunate, and he talks about how Deku is a kid, a first of his generation, probably, to have something called a power. It's not a quirk, but it's much different. So if he doesn't show signs of a quirk, it's just something that is more powerful than a quirk, and he has it. So I guess that's all I need to tell you. This is where Azumi's like, she's like starts to choke on her words, and he says, but, and then she's like, never mind. And then she walks to the line. She's like, so, mom and dad should know this. And this is where she says, I have to get on a phone call. And then she says, Bakugo, come here. This is where some of the girls are suspicious. Some of the girls and boys are suspicious. So they sneakily follow Bakugo and Izumi. And but Aizawa just letting it happen because he doesn't really care, and he's a goat. And he says, I guess we're waiting for them. And then this is where the whole class goes, even Ida. And this is where she gets on his fob, and he says, Mom. And this is where Izumi says, Mom, Dad, I have some bad news for you. And this is where Inko, they're on speaker, just so Bakugo can hear. And she says, and Baku says, "Hello, Miss Midoriya." And this is where she says, "Hi, Bakugo. What's the problem?" And then she says, "You know how we were requested on behalf of Midoriya? Well," and she's like, "I know, but you know, we can just steal if he becomes the number one hero or such." She starts explaining, we can just take all his money, sue him because he's our son. And this is where she says, I know that, but the teacher, Aizawa Sensei, or Aizawa, or better known as Eraserhead. I'm gonna talk in a girl voice. Better known as Eraserhead. He's told us that Izuku, our brother, doesn't have a quirk, but has something called a power. And he's the first of his generation, and he has multiple powers. And I guess he was not worth doing. And he says, but that can't be true. He's quirkless. Yeah, but he's not powerless. And this is where Inko says, Hasashi. And Hisashi says, yeah, I'm listening. And she says, maybe we should have never threw him out into the woods. Or maybe he should have died. Or, too bad. I guess we still got that big money coming for us. He can't do nothing. And this is where all the class hears what happens. Sato, the guy that can create food, is like, oh crap. And Momo is like, my parents would treat me like this. And class 1A is questioning themselves. And this is where Bakugo and Azumi pop up from the corner, and then they see the whole entire class 1A just looking confused. This is where Midoriya is falling from. Never mind, cut that out. This is where he's talking with Aizawa, and then he sees the whole class, and he's confused, and the whole class are talking like, "You're sick." The whole class says, and then they like, and Bakugo, you notice, and you're both sick. And then this is where Midori says, "Who's sick?" I mean, like, cause I can just heal them if that's okay with any of you. This is where everybody looks at Midori and says, they start like, they'll like have some pitiful faces. And this is where Midori says, "Why the pitiful faces?" It's like, your family stinks, Kirishima says. They're a bunch of hungry money, quirk-loving people. And then this is where Midori says, like I didn't know that. This is where Jiro has a interesting thing about her quirk. When she takes in sound, she can record it and play it out loud. So this is what she does. She takes her headphones and she says, "Midoriya, please stay still." And this is probably gonna hurt, only for 2 seconds. This is where he says, "Okay." This is where she takes her earlobes or earlobes and pushes it into Midoriya's like stomach. And this is where Midoriya hears everything that they were talking about. And this is where he says, "Well, I don't really care. They can sue me and take my money from me. I don't really care. At the end of the day, when they take money, the only thing I'm gonna give them is a dime. Because even though I'm your son, doesn't mean I'm obligated to give you money. And you see a bunch of heroes that have parents that don't give their parents or anybody money and keep it for themselves. And some people actually sue the heroes, and the heroes end up only having to pay a dime or $1 minimum. So I don't really care. Their plan would end up backfiring on them. So let's go. And I don't care. And then they say, "But you lived in the woods." And this is where he says, "Yeah, they kicked you out their car and put you in the woods." And he says, "Yeah, I don't really care. If they kept sugarcoating me my whole life, if they knew they knew I was actually powerful, had power, and was not powerless, I would have never turned up like I was like this. I would have been some kid that would only use my power to help my family. Snap, money for mom and dad, and that's it." And this is what he says, "Well, let's get on. They're not important. And the only reason why those two are here is because of me. So I don't really care. At the end of the day, they try to mess with me, they have another thing coming." And I'm just gonna skip everything. Midoriya gets first on everything, breaking the sound barrier, actually hitting the moon on the throw, and he decides to start jumping. He gets first. Everything he gets first. And that's exactly where I'm gonna leave it off. If you guys enjoyed, like and subscribe, and turn on those post notifications. And that is the God of Anime, God of Weebs signing off. I'm sorry.